Americans used to be proud of their country, and rightfully so. Why? They were citizens of the dominant global superpower, which helped create a better world by promoting values across the globe, like a free market, free speech, and a justice system which held the presumption of innocence. Even the most ardent critics of America would have to concede that after World War II, with Europe in tatters, bombed out, drained of life and energy, the way which the United States responded was superlative. Left standing were the victors, the competing ideologies of the United States and Russia, while the communists devoured their gained territories, terrorizing and enslaving the people acquired, immiserating the populations. America helped not only rebuild Germany and Japan, allowing them to prosper and grow, but then left them almost entirely to their own devices rather than owning them. And I doubt that there has ever existed another power which would have behaved in the same manner. Certainly not the commies, we know that. And if you think that I'm exaggerating about the negative effects communism had, just go and ask 10 people who lived under Soviet control and see what they have to say. And for me, it's not 10. I've heard hundreds of such stories and experienced the misery up close, having lived in Eastern Europe and having traveled to the Czech Republic, Hungary, Ukraine, Poland, Russia, amongst others, and spoken to many people about their trials and tribulations under communism. My ex-girlfriend from Poland didn't get her first pair of shoes until she was 6 years old, and then once a year, if she was lucky. My friend's wife became incensed that I walked into their St. Petersburg, Russia condominium with shoes on because I would ruin the floor more quickly. Now, my buddy is actually a very wealthy Russian, and his wife lacks for nothing, and she's a very nice, even-keeled person. What then could have precipitated such a reaction? The privation of her childhood, growing up with nothing in rural Siberia, where it was impossible to replace anything that had been permanently damaged. And here I am, the privileged American, walking on her floor with dirty shoes. Anywhere that communism has touched, the people are miserable and uninviting. I was last in Moscow in 2009 with 2 American friends, and all agreed visually on the conspicuous lack of smiles, as well as experiencing a palpable, sad, heavy feeling generated when walking around the streets of the capital of the former Soviet Union. And honestly, the lack of smiles, how can you blame them? It is literally a function of what I refer to as the hangover of communism. What is that? It's not a reference to the heavy drinking which Eastern Europeans are famous for. It's referring to the fact that in the former Soviet Union, if you said the wrong thing to the wrong person, you were sent to forced labor or to death into the gulags of Siberia, the Gulag Archipelago, as documented by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, which is, by the way, well worth the read and should be required reading for high school children in the West. In East Germany, approximately 1 in 3 people are estimated to be informers to the Stasi, the secret police. So if it was likely that at some point someone within your own family was going to rat you out, you'd have to be insane to invite a conversation with somebody that you did not know. And as a loving parent, do you think that you'd want to teach your children to be open to strangers, or for their own protection, teach them to keep everyone at arm's length who they did not know intimately? as many people are still alive from this era, their reticence to speak to a stranger are literally etched into their faces. In America, we have freedom of speech. You can go ahead and criticize Donald Trump when he was president. Call him the worst names in the book, lie about him, as the media continually did, and you are protected by the First Amendment. Try doing that in virtually any other country. I've lived in Thailand, where somebody, while I was there, went to prison for leaving a bad review about a hotel. Speak badly about the king. Hey, here's 20 years in prison as a reward. Try it in China. They'll just kill you and sell your organs to the Saudi royal family, where perhaps one of them might need a third kidney. Hell, even in Britain, and America has based their laws on British common law in the past. Today, if somebody takes offense to something that you stated online, the police will investigate you, possibly imprison you. You have to be extremely careful about your utterances virtually everywhere else on the planet. And let's talk about self-preservation, self-protection. In America, you have the right to protect yourself with a firearm, enshrined in our Constitution under the Bill of Rights by the Second Amendment. When the Nazis in Germany, the communists in China, Russia, and Cambodia rose to power, the first thing they did was disarm their citizens so that the power of the state would have no pushback, so that they would not be resisted. And the great evil that befell its citizenry, whose government was unafraid of them, is right out there in the open. I've stood in Auschwitz, gazing at the dolls of young children and their eyeglasses left behind as the Nazis gassed them. In Russia, the police would raid your house in the middle of the night, knowing that you had no rifle on hand, and promptly send you on a train to the Siberian gulags. I have bent over in the killing fields of Cambodia and picked up bone fragments still there on the ground, and seen the large trees where the soldiers pounded the heads of small children, babies, until they died, rather than waste a bullet on them. 25% of the population extinguished. Children growing up orphans. The pain is palpable 40 years later. And the Marxists and leftists of America want us to ignore these historical precedences and give up our guns. Be grateful that this right is enshrined and protected by our Constitution. And you think that you're poor in America with your $30,000 a year salary. You rail against the 1%. Well, guess what? Stop comparing yourself to Elon. Lower the resolution of your outrage. And guess what? Discover some amazing news. You're in the top 1% of earners worldwide. You are the 1% by virtue of being born in America. Does that put it a little bit in perspective for you? Here is a video I took in Cambodia of workers being transported in cattle cars to their factory jobs, making garments for the likes of Walmart for a few dollars a day. Their drive for $5 a day was put down violently so you could maintain your buying power and have cheap clothing. Here is a photo I took of an entire family selling nuts along the side of the road in Mongolia. That is how they feed themselves, how they provide dental care for their children. That, of course, was a joke. What I'm describing is an impossibility because dentists don't even exist outside of Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia's capital city. So go ahead, yell about your oppression because someone else makes more than you, rather than understanding how most of the rest of the world lives, and show some gratitude for how good you actually have it. How good? Okay, another example. You have the American dollar. What a gift. You have the world's reserve currency in your hand. It's fiat money, meaning by decree. And sure, it's backed by the likes of Google and Apple being headquartered in America, along with naval destroyers, nuclear bombs, the Marines. And sure, right now, because of the ineptitude of the Biden administration and their war on fossil fuels, and they're willingly printing 40% of the dollars in worldwide circulation since COVID began, which they throw out like confetti at a graduation party, greasing the palms of their corporate donors, but in fairness, reserving 5% of the total to bribe stupid people to vote for them in the midterms, like paying off their student loans. We are seeing a spike in inflation, but the dollar is still in massive demand globally because all of the other crackpot regimes, save maybe the Swiss and the Singaporeans, who, by the way, lack the US military, are far worse and more dishonest, meaning the United States has the waning ability to continue to print their way out of fiscal irresponsibility and the ability to export the created inflation to the poorest people around the globe who hold the US dollars. Why? Because their currencies are debasing at a much faster rate, whether they be in Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Argentina, Lebanon, Myanmar. Their currencies are difficult to even give away outside of the borders. Give $1 trillion Zimbabwean bill away as a gift and get slapped in return. And in the United States, even if you aren't wealthy, you have the ability to get ahead economically. That is why so many people around the world still dream of coming to America to work their way up the economic ladder. Try doing that in most any other country where your economic prospects are largely a function of the family that you were born into and who you might be tied to politically. That's why so many immigrants to our country cherish the American dream and defend it, while those who have been born into America burn the American flag and declare us an unjust nation. So go ahead and demand the US government print you up some cash and pay off your college loan that you took out for women's studies, because boo-hoo-hoo-hoo, you're so oppressed. And let's talk about travel, freedom of movement. You, my friend, you have an American passport, and that gives you the opportunity to travel virtually anywhere without a visa, because most countries welcome you in because you are known to have money and will help support the local economy. You realize that most nations in the world cannot even stop for a layover in America without a transit permit, which, by the way, is fairly costly and isn't always super easy to get within one's home country, much less when you're on the exterior, when it becomes nearly impossible. That means that you can't even set foot into an American airport if you are unfortunate enough to have been born in the majority of countries around the globe. And guess where most of the cheaper airfares go through if you want to travel from Latin America to Asia or Europe or vice versa? Take a guess. That means that the poorest people in the world are forced to pay higher prices to get to their destination than the wealthiest people on the globe, and have much longer travel times to reach their ultimate destination. And for those of you who want to complain about the racism that exists in America, go to Eastern Europe. Find out what they think of blacks, or Jews for that matter. Chinese propaganda rails politically against America and how badly we treat blacks, but internally are literally willing to whitewash any black person who happens to be there. Did you know that the Arabian slave trade brought through Africa many more blacks, devastated souls than ever reached American shores? Millions and millions more. But how is that possible, you point out? Wouldn't there be many more blacks in Arab lands? Show me the evidence, because I think that you're lying. Well, I have to admit, there is no evidence at the moment, and that is because the Arab slave traders castrated all of the male blacks who entered their lands, preventing them from reproducing and passing on their genes. Yet in the mind of the left and those who hate America, the United States is singularly responsible for the slave trade, the only nation to partake in it, despite the fact that we had, at the cost of 600,000 lives, an internal civil war to destroy the practice. And in Saudi Arabia, it took another 100 years before it was officially abolished. And it still exists in large segments of the Arab and North African and South Asian world. But America is the great evil in their mind still. So let's talk about the gays, the queers, the lesbians, the transsexuals. I have nothing against you personally. Live and let live is my motto. It's what I go by. And here you guys are winning essentially equal rights, which, by the way, I'm in favor of. Go ahead and get married and be miserable like the rest of us. But you don't want to just be accepted. You demand the right to describe your sex life to school-aged children, to have drag queen story hour for the kiddos and seemingly try to indoctrinate them into a cult, all the while complaining and demonizing anybody who resists the idea. Then, because it's an ideology that makes no sense, the LGBTQ XYZ community sides with Palestine in the battle with Israel. Because maybe you believe that their path of standing up against an oppressor mirrors yours. I'm not sure, but you've got gays for Palestine, queers for Palestine. I invite you to head straight over there and have a great gay pride march in the Gaza Strip. Stand up for those Palestinians and see how many minutes you last before they round you up and throw you from atop a building for the crime of being openly gay. I don't even know what they do to the trans activists. And lastly, let's talk to those deluded Antifa types. You call America repressive. You dare to burn the American flag and take advantage of the free speech afforded to you by the Constitution as you do everything you can to tear it apart. As you attempt to impose upon everyone else your godless Marxist utopia, never learning the lessons of history, of the pain, suffering, misery, and death that communism brings ubiquitously to wherever it's been attempted, and how anti-human it in fact is. I invite you to try your little antics on the streets of Shanghai and Beijing and see how long it is till they come and smash your skulls in and feed you to the dogs, and your organs are circulating around Saudi Arabia. But one thing I'll say, I can agree with you. America is not perfect. Not even close. If for no other reason than it is composed of human beings. And guess what? Every other country on this planet is made up of the same humans with the same general idiosyncrasies and fears and greed, with the same evolutionary desire to thrive and to pass on their genes and enjoy life as much as they can. And by way of the foresight of our founding fathers, by luck of geography and the natural resources endowed into these great lands, and principles which attracted the best and brightest from around the globe, which helped to build the US industry and intellectual know-how, no country on this planet today comes close to rivaling the United States of America. So if you're out there and you're one of those people who in the past has hated America, who has looked down upon it, who has spoken badly of her, please, let's refresh your vision with a comparison to the imperfect world that exists and acknowledge that America and her values are the best bet, not only for you, but for the entire planet as a whole. And you, my friend, are one of the chosen, the 5% of the planet lucky enough to have an American passport, the world's reserve currency, the ability to strive and get ahead if you work hard, and the right to publicly disagree with me about everything that I've stated. So be grateful to the veterans who gave their life so you could be free. Be grateful that there is an America on this planet countering the malignant forces of communism and would-be dictators. Show some gratitude, America. You're the luckiest people on the planet.